Let's talk about block properties BE. Hello everyone, this is Ali. Welcome to the Mentor Code Lab. I will update my Draw.io file later because right now, as I said, I'm not sure if I want to keep this class or I will drop it. And honestly, this is a side project. Right now, I'm just explaining things to you, recording video after video, although you won't get all these videos in one day, but this is the free time I have, so I want to push forward for recording every video. Let's talk about block properties, block entity, or BE. The things that we have in this file belongs to a block, but is related to a block entity. Now, here's the thing. The block properties itself is not generic, but the properties related to a block entity is generic because we want to know the type of the block entity. Now, we have a supplier of the block entity type. We want to know the block entity type. You will see that it's being used here because later we may want to somehow address it inside our block at any time. Now, any block that has a block entity may tick or may not tick. Keep in mind, at the same time that we are developing this library, I'm teaching you some fundamental things about block entities. Because when we are done with this whole library mini-series, we will go back into our main mod, and the place that we put a stop on that series is exactly to start with block entities. So I'm teaching you some basic concepts, at the same time medium concepts, and maybe some advanced concepts, I'm not sure, about block entities right now. Any block entity may tick or may not tick. If the block entity is ticking, then 20 times per second, it will call a method on itself. And that method is responsible of handling anything related to the ticking, like calculating a recipe or, I don't know, calculating the produced or reduced energy or anything else. However, a block entity may not tick. What do I mean by that? A block entity that does not tick can be a chest. For example, a chest has an inventory, has to be a block entity because it needs to know its own inventory at any position in the world. And it's not ticking because it's not calculating anything. All it has is an inventory. So when we have a block that should relate itself to a block entity, we want to know if we should tick that block entity or if we should not tick that block entity. Then we need a factory for the block entity to create that block entity and return the block entity inside the block. Because if you look, any block that has block entities will have to implement a method from block entity provider, and that is create block entity. And for this, we need to have a factory for the block entity so that we can create the block entity. Also, if we have a ticker, then we need to create the ticker for the block entity. Now remember, we have it here as the previous implementation. Get ticker is calling the iTick, get ticker the word, and this means that we should make sure that every block entity that we have is implementing this iTick. And honestly, I did not implement it here. Actually, iUpdatable is not extending iTick, and that's the problem here because IB screen is just extended the screen handler, and as you see, all of these are going back to this guy, and this guy was not handling the tick. If I extend any block entity from here, as you see, I forgot to implement iTick, and this can happen. So we should make sure that anything that we are providing as block entity is handling the iTick if we want to. And basically, the way we had done it so far is not as flexible as I thought it would be. We will talk about them later. So we had done it before, and here is the same thing. We are using an interface. We will take a look at these two interfaces in a few minutes, but all it's doing is just calling this thing so that when we go back into our new block, we will check if we should tick, then we will call this factory, and basically that's it, and return it, okay? Other than that, as I said, 30 is working with multi-blocks, and I will have a brainstorming about multi-blocks down the road, maybe when we are finished with the libraries before we go back into the blocks. And I will tell you why I didn't implement it from his library right now. There is a reason there. But anyway, then we have two different booleans. One, when we right-click the block, should we open a user interface or not? And then, if we break the block, should we drop the content of the block on the floor or not? Okay, like the block properties, these are the things that work hand in hand with with the block and block entity, but these are related to the block itself. We have a constructor that accepts the supplier for the type of the block entity. And as you see, we will call the block entity factory and make a position and the state. We go into block entity type supplier, means that this is the type of the block entity, get the block entity type, and then instantiate the block entity using pause and state. After that, like the concepts that we had on block properties, we have different methods that will set the values for our fields. For example, if we should tick or not, we have two overloads. Here we make sure that it's true. Here we accept the param itself. Then block entity factory, we will get the block entity factory, assign it, and at the end of each of these methods we are returning this. Then this is the block entity ticker factory. Again, we had something for multi-blocks. I commented it out right now. Then we have the right click GUI blah that sets it to true, and this is the other overload that we accept the flag itself. Same concept for drop contents on break. Now this is all to it. Now in previous video I mentioned that maybe I want to cut the whole thing from this class and put it back inside block properties, but honestly it's not possible. The reason is this generic on top. Now think about two different blocks. One has a block entity and another block is just a decorative block and doesn't produce any relationship with any block entity. It's a simple block. Now in the case of a block having a block entity, yes, we can have a generic like this because we already have registered the block entity somewhere in our mod, and we can have something like this. We can have a new block properties BE, and here is the type that we need to produce. Block entity type in it, or I don't know, mod block entities, whatever. This is the type of the block entity. However, and by the way, that is being used here. However, if we are not related to any block entity, then we can't fulfill this generic. And if we can't fulfill this generic, then we have a problem instantiating it. So basically, if I get this and put it there, if at any point in any code I want to have something like var test equals to new block properties, this may look like it's working, but we already are not producing any type. So let's say that it's BE, and you see that we have a problem here. If I say null, that's the supplier. This is a block entity that is not there. And honestly, I don't like it. So the reason he had dissected it is that some blocks may not have a block entity, and because of that, we don't need to deal with them. Although we may desire to cut this section and put it back inside the main block properties class, honestly, I think it's a better approach to keep them separated, now that I think about it. Time to look at these two interfaces. IBE factory is just an interface that is functional. T extends any block entity, and we call the create for the block pose and the block state. And then IBE ticker factory is again another functional interface for the block entity that we create the ticker for the word state type and return the block entity ticker. And as you see, this is the use case that we already had for that one. We will take a look at this block entity factory. We send in the position and the state. We get the supplier of the block entity type. We instantiate the block entity. And we are doing it internally. And because of that, we don't have, actually we have it. We can produce it if we want to. But honestly, this should handle the most use cases. This was the properties for a block that are related to a block entity. This covers the block properties and the block properties BE, and at the same time we took a look at the IBE ticker factory and IBE factory. In the next video we will go back and take a look at state properties and state property, because those two were used by our block properties here. The state properties, and I'm fairly sure that the state properties, yes, has a map for a state property, so we have to take a look at the state property now. This happens in the next video.
If you like these videos, please subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and turn on that bell so that when I publish a new video, you will get informed. Have fun everyone. Bye.